Every few years, a new headline declares parenting itself is broken, that an entire generation of parents has somehow forgotten how to raise children properly. The bad parenting epidemic gets blamed for anxious kids, disrespectful teenagers, and a culture that supposedly values screens over genuine family connection. This is the Fiscal Historian, where we dig through the archives of money and power to understand how economic history actually shaped family life. If you are new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because today's parenting panic connects directly to centuries of economic transformation. Tell us, honestly, when did you first hear parenting itself described as a national crisis? And we will read through every comment on this video. This conversation at the Fiscal Historian is about to reveal something most parenting commentary conveniently leaves out of the entire conversation. Let's start with an uncomfortable historical fact that rarely appears in modern parenting panic coverage across news outlets and social media platforms. Every generation in recorded economic history has accused the previous generation's children of eventually becoming worse parents than the generation before them. That pattern is not evidence of genuinely declining parenting quality. It is evidence of a recurring cultural anxiety that resurfaces during economic disruption specifically. Consider the transition from agricultural to industrial economies, when families abruptly shifted from working together on farms to working separately in factories. Before industrialization, children worked alongside parents constantly, learning skills, values, and discipline through shared daily labor rather than dedicated parenting time. Industrialization physically separated parents from children for the first time at genuine scale, sending fathers, and increasingly mothers, into factories for long shifts. Social commentators of that era genuinely worried this separation would produce a generation of poorly raised, morally deficient children lacking parental guidance entirely. Newspapers published concerned essays about factory work destroying family bonds, essays that sound strikingly similar to modern concerns about dual-income households today. That historical panic emerged not from actual evidence of worse parenting outcomes, but from genuine economic disruption, reshaping how families spent their limited daily time. Consider the specific economic pressure driving that disruption, because understanding the pressure explains the panic far better than any claim about declining parental character. Industrial wages for a single worker often could not support an entire family, pushing multiple household members into paid labor simply to survive financially. Families were not choosing less involved parenting out of laziness. Families were responding rationally to wage levels that made single-income households increasingly impossible. The same basic pattern reappeared during the 20th century as women entered the paid workforce at increasing rates across most developed economies simultaneously. Commentators again worried that working mothers would produce poorly attached, poorly supervised children, framing an economic necessity as a moral parenting failure instead. Economic historians studying this period find that stagnating single incomes, not changing values, primarily drove the shift toward dual-income household arrangements. Housing costs, healthcare costs, and general living expenses climbed steadily throughout the post-war decades, gradually making two incomes a practical necessity rather than a lifestyle preference. Yet public commentary rarely framed the shift honestly as an economic response, instead framing it repeatedly as a moral choice reflecting declining parental priorities. That reframing matters enormously, because it shifted responsibility for a structural economic problem onto individual parents who had genuinely limited practical alternatives available. Consider the specific language used during the Great Depression, when economic collapse forced many mothers into paid work out of sheer financial necessity. Social workers and commentators of that era described these mothers using language strikingly similar to modern criticism of dual-income parenting choices. Yet those mothers were not choosing paid work over their children. They were choosing between paid work and their children going without adequate food entirely. That distinction between choice and necessity gets consistently erased in historical parenting commentary, replaced instead with simplified moral judgment about priorities. Consider also how wartime economies repeatedly disrupted traditional parenting arrangements, pulling both parents into essential labor during major historical conflicts. During major wars, governments actively encouraged women into factory and agricultural labor, temporarily normalizing exactly the arrangements later criticized during peacetime. That wartime necessity briefly silenced parenting panic entirely, revealing how much these concerns fluctuate based on economic and political convenience rather than fixed principle. Once wars ended and labor needs shifted, cultural messaging reversed sharply, once again framing working mothers as neglecting children rather than serving economic necessity. This whiplash reveals something important. Parenting panic tracks economic convenience for institutions and employers far more closely than it tracks any consistent concern for children. Consider how this exact pattern repeats again today, as parents juggle demanding jobs, rising childcare costs, and stagnant wages relative to overall cost of living increases. Modern commentary blames screen time and permissive parenting for social problems. rarely examining the economic pressure shaping parental availability. A parent working 2 jobs, or a single demanding job with unpredictable scheduling, has objectively less available time for the kind of engaged parenting older generations idealize. That reduced availability stems directly from economic conditions, wage stagnation, expensive housing, and unstable scheduling, not from some sudden collective decline in parental values. Consider childcare costs specifically, since they illustrate this economic pressure clearly across developed economies facing similar affordability challenges. In many major cities, formal childcare now costs more annually than public college tuition, once cost a single generation earlier, an almost unbelievable shift in relative pricing. Parents facing that specific cost calculation frequently cannot afford the kind of dedicated, unhurried parental attention earlier generations experienced under very different economic conditions. This is not a story about parents choosing convenience over connection. This is a story about parents navigating genuinely constrained economic circumstances as rationally as possible. Consider also how historical family structures themselves shifted dramatically due to economic forces rather than any change in fundamental parental commitment or genuine care. Extended families living together, with grandparents providing daily childcare, gradually gave way to smaller households as work increasingly required relocating. A parent today frequently lacks the built-in extended family support network that eased parenting burdens for previous generations living in more geographically stable communities. That structural absence is an economic outcome, driven by labor markets rewarding geographic flexibility, not a reflection of parents somehow valuing family connection less deeply. Consider how media technology itself has repeatedly become a scapegoat throughout history whenever genuine economic pressure made parenting feel more difficult during specific historical periods. Radio was blamed for distracting children from homework and family conversation during the early 20th century, echoing remarkably similar concerns raised about television decades later. Television then absorbed similar blame for supposedly replacing genuine parental engagement, concerns that predate today's remarkably similar worries about smartphones and social media entirely. Each new technology becomes a convenient, visible villain, easier to blame than the underlying economic pressure actually driving families toward relying on that technology for practical relief. A parent working long hours out of financial necessity may reasonably use a screen to occupy a child during moments when sustained attention is not available. That choice reflects genuine economic constraint far more than it reflects declining parental values, yet commentary consistently frames the choice as a character or values failure instead. Consider also how the printing press and mass literacy created an entirely new historical vehicle for parenting anxiety by allowing worries to spread rapidly across regions. Before mass media, parenting concerns remained largely local, shared through community gossip, rather than nationally amplified headlines reaching millions of anxious parents simultaneously. Once newspapers and later broadcast media achieved wide distribution, isolated local anxieties could suddenly become national narratives within days rather than spreading slowly over years. That amplification effect means today's parenting panic spreads through social media at a speed and scale earlier historical panics never approached, intensifying the perceived crisis. A single viral post about a parenting failure can reach millions within hours, creating an impression of widespread crisis that may not reflect actual statistical trends. Economic historians studying media amplification note that perceived crises often outpace measurable reality, since attention-grabbing content spreads faster than careful statistical analysis. This does not mean genuine parenting challenges are imaginary. Real economic pressure genuinely constrains real families in ways worth taking seriously and addressing directly. It means the specific framing, an epidemic of bad parenting, deserves scrutiny, since epidemic language implies a sudden outbreak of individual failure rather than gradual structural pressure. Consider how this pattern connects to broader shifts in how economies value and compensate caregiving labor throughout different historical periods and economic systems. Unpaid caregiving labor, historically performed primarily by mothers and extended family, was never counted within formal economic measurements, like gross domestic product calculations. That exclusion from formal accounting meant caregiving labor received no direct compensation and became economically unsustainable as living costs rose steadily. As formal wages became necessary for household survival, the unpaid caregiving labor that once absorbed significant daily parenting time simply had less available time to occupy. This economic squeeze did not happen because parents began valuing careers over children. It happened because survival increasingly required income that caregiving alone could not provide. Consider also how public policy choices throughout history have either eased or worsened this exact economic squeeze facing parents across different countries and different eras. Nations that invested heavily in subsidized childcare and paid parental leave consistently show different parenting outcomes than nations relying on individual resources. That variation across policy environments strongly suggests structural economic support, not individual parental character. drives much of the variation in parenting outcomes commonly observed. Where policy eased the economic pressure on families, parents generally had more available time and resources to engage in the kind of parenting broadly considered ideal. Where policy left families to navigate economic pressure independently, parenting outcomes reflected that pressure, regardless of how deeply individual parents cared about their children's well-being. Consider also how blaming individual parents conveniently avoids the harder political work of raising wages, subsidizing childcare, or reforming inflexible workplace scheduling. It is far easier to publish an article criticizing screen time than to advocate for policy changes requiring sustained political effort and genuine institutional cost. That convenience helps explain why moral framing persists so consistently across centuries, even as the underlying economic explanation remains readily available to anyone examining the data. This distinction matters for how we interpret today's parenting panic, since blaming individual parents ignores decades of policy choices shaping actual conditions. Consider how earlier historical panics about parenting eventually resolved, offering some genuinely useful perspective on how today's concerns might eventually be understood by future generations. The industrial era panic about factory work destroying family bonds eventually gave way to new social norms, new institutions, and new expectations that absorbed the disruption gradually. Public education systems expanded, partly in response to concerns about unsupervised children, a structural policy response rather than a moral lecture aimed at parents. That historical resolution suggests structural problems generally require structural solutions, rather than parents simply trying harder within unchanged circumstances. Consider how this framing shift from moral failure to economic pressure changes the entire tone of a conversation that currently generates enormous guilt among modern parents. Parents reading headlines about a bad parenting epidemic often internalize guilt, believing their choices reflect personal failure rather than structural constraint. That internalized guilt rarely produces better outcomes for children, since guilt consumes energy that might otherwise support genuine engagement within limited time. Understanding the historical pattern, recognizing this panic as economically driven, offers something genuinely useful beyond validating parental frustration and guilt. It suggests advocating for structural support, affordable childcare, and fair wages matters more than internalizing blame for circumstances outside individual control. Consider how this same convenient blame pattern shows up in workplace policy discussions, where flexible scheduling reforms are debated for decades without meaningful implementation. Consider also how this pattern connects to broader economic themes the Fiscal Historian has traced repeatedly across housing, retirement, and now family formation throughout modern economic history. Systems built during specific economic conditions quietly stop functioning once those conditions change, and responsibility gets pushed downward onto individuals. Parenting expectations formed during eras of single-income households. Extended family support and lower living costs simply do not match today's economic reality most families actually navigate. Yet the expectations themselves rarely get updated to reflect changed economic conditions, leaving parents measured against a standard that assumes resources many families genuinely do not have. That mismatch between outdated expectations and current economic reality produces exactly the kind of widespread anxiety and self-blame characterizing today's bad parenting epidemic narrative. None of this denies that individual parenting choices matter, or that some children genuinely need more attention, structure, or support than they currently receive from overwhelmed parents. It simply argues that framing this primarily as a crisis of parental character, rather than a crisis of economic support, consistently produces worse understanding and worse solutions overall. History offers a clear, repeating pattern here. Whenever economic conditions squeeze families, commentary tends to blame parental values rather than examine the actual economic pressure at work. That pattern repeated during industrialization, repeated as women entered the workforce, and continues today as families navigate housing and childcare costs. Recognizing that pattern does not eliminate the genuine difficulty of raising children today, it redirects the conversation toward causes more likely to help. The Fiscal Historian exists precisely to trace these patterns, connecting today's cultural anxieties directly to the economic history that most conversations about parenting simply never mention. If today's parenting struggles have ever felt like a personal failure rather than a structural challenge, you are recognizing a pattern history has actually documented repeatedly before. History does not repeat exactly, but the economic pressure, squeezing families, and the resulting cultural panic blaming parents rather than policy repeats with remarkable consistency across centuries. Hit subscribe, because the Fiscal Historian will keep tracing these patterns back to the economic conditions actually shaping family life throughout recorded history.